This is the Avalara webinar for the TM group talking about Dynamics 365 Business Central today. My name is Larry Sheets. I'm a sales executive on the Microsoft Dynamics team at Avalara, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Jeffrey Lutters. He'll be leading the technical demonstration and actually showing the functionality in Business Central. Let's go ahead and kick things off. Here's the agenda today. We're going to talk about why companies are moving to an automated sales tax solution, the trade-offs and pros and cons of cloud versus on-premise solutions. More importantly, why folks are moving their sales tax compliance from in-house to Avalara. And then we'll go deeper into the Business Central functionality and how everything works and ties together from a calculation standpoint, certificate management standpoint for your exempt customers, as well as your reporting to the individual states. And we'll wrap things up with a quick Q&A at the end. But if questions come up as we move along, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll address them as we get to those topics. So leading with introductions, I'll go ahead and kick things off. As I mentioned, I'm a sales executive on the Microsoft Dynamics team at Avalara, work with hundreds of Microsoft Dynamics customers on an annual basis. I'm also the customer-facing representative for our strategic partnership with the TM group. Before Avalara, I was a financial advisor with Edward Jones, and even before that, I was an officer in the Coast Guard for 8 years. And the star of the show today is Jeffrey Lutters. As I mentioned, he's one of our solutions consultants. He brings over 10 years of transaction tax automation experience, and even more importantly than that, he's been working with Microsoft customers in this space for well over 15 years, and he's worked with nearly 5,000 mid-size and large companies to help them resolve their tax challenges. So Jeffrey, thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's kick things off at a very high level on why companies are choosing to automate their sales tax management program. Short answer is, as you know, each day passes, the sales tax environment is becoming more and more complex. Right out of the gate, we're looking at in the US approximately 152 million mailing addresses. So capturing the correct rates, especially if there's a location where there's multiple rates, is a burden that falls traditionally on your in-house tax staff. There's a lot of complexity associated with that, you know, with over 12,000 jurisdictional rules, tens of thousands of rates. You know, when you factor in fuel tax scenarios, that's another 131,000 things to stay on top of, millions of product and service exemptions. You all get the idea. And that's dealing with the taxable piece of the business, not even getting into the hundreds of thousands of exempt customers who you're more than likely working with. So these are great stats, but all to illustrate the point that this is getting increasingly complex and becoming a bigger and bigger burden on your staff to not only maintain compliance, but making sure you're doing it correctly. So this further illustrates that since June of 2018 with the Wayfair versus South Dakota Supreme Court ruling, remote sales tax laws, those economic thresholds that you hear about in the news, are ramping up as well. So the picture on the left outlines the state of the economic threshold states in January of last year. And then you can see 12 months later, we've seen that jump to now of the 45 states that collect sales tax, 43 of them have these individual state-specific threshold requirements, increasing that compliance burden again. So kind of as we've been talking about how complex it is, automation is really stepping into this space to increase accuracy, manage your sales tax requirements more efficiently while removing risk from the table. What we've seen is that leads to more satisfied customers. There's, in the sense that there's no doubt that the correct application of sales tax rates, as well as the rules specific to your products and the management of your exempt customers, is outsourced, and you can trust that, at least with Avalara, it's being done accurately every single time. And the follow on from that is you are now freeing up your folks and resources internally to focus on growing the business rather than dedicating folks and money to just sales tax compliance. So when we're looking at automated sales tax solutions, we've got really two categories, putting them in the cloud versus the traditional on-premise solution. So question that we typically get is, why move to the cloud? What's the benefit? Predominantly what we see, because we are a cloud-based vendor in this space, is time to deploy. So time to go live is dramatically shortened. Um, it's a more efficient process, both in terms of the implementation as well as the management of the system. The cost associated for our model, you're paying a subscription model based on usage of our products. We'll get into what that looks like here in a little bit. But the idea behind a cloud-based solution is quick to deploy, it's efficient, and will save you money. When the on-premise and cloud-based solutions are ultimately going to get you to the same compliance level, cloud-based will get you there quicker and more efficiently. So why Avalara? These bullet points here are typical trigger events. You'll see that they run a wide gamut of kind of prompts for folks who come to Avalara for assistance with their sales tax. Some of them have, say, a new product or path to market. In the COVID-19 environment, we've been helping a ton of businesses who frankly didn't have an e-commerce presence launch that and do it correctly and efficiently in a way that maximizes their resources. We're looking at selling in new geographic areas. That goes back to that slide with all the economic threshold laws rolling out on a monthly basis. Acquisitions, and then there's the technical side with folks coming to us. We're designed around a pre-built integration model. So whatever system you're moving from or currently using, we likely have a pre-built certified connector that we plug in, and automatically you can implement and start your sales tax automation journey with us while freeing up your resources to do what they do best. So a lot of folks come to us for a variety of reasons, whether that be a regulatory change, a technical update. We have solutions for all of those folks. So as I mentioned, we're designed to be a plug and play solution for you. We've got nearly 750 at this point pre-built integrations for your ERPs, your accounting systems, e-commerce, your CRM, as well as point of sale. And that's just using our connectors. We also have best-in-class API documentation for customers who want to write their own integration to our tax engine. We're designed to scale with you globally. We have the expertise for not only North America, but the EU. As more and more vendors are moving online to the e-commerce world, they need a solution that scales up wherever their customers are located. And speaking to the scalable capability, we work with brand new startups who've never sold anything on the one end, all the way up through the biggest Fortune 100 companies. So we can handle any amount of volume thrown at us. And we actually stand behind our product to the point of providing an accuracy guarantee. And finally, peace of mind. You can trust us that we're doing all of your sales tax compliance accurately, correctly, each and every time, without creating a burden or requiring intervention from your staff. So, I know we covered a lot of ground here, but Avalara's solution really focuses on three core products here, three core platforms, which Jeffrey's going to walk through here in a moment. But the first is AvaTax here. This is our calculation engine. And specific to our conversation today, we're going to talk about how it plugs into Dynamics 365 Business Central. Then we're going to talk about the customer piece. So in any calculation, we're looking at three things predominantly. Where is this taking place? So we're capturing the correct rate. How is your product being viewed in that location? That stands to the taxability rules that change product to product, location to location. And then finally, who is this actually being shipped to? Who is this customer? Should you be charging sales tax? Do you have an exemption certificate on file for them? This is our exemption management platform called Cert Capture. And then finally, on the back end, we have our return service where all this calculation and certificate management takes place on our cloud service automatically every time there's a transaction that's stored for reporting purposes in our dashboard, and all of that information is passed to our return service. So if you want us to, file all your sales and use tax returns for you as well, we have that capability. And the typical feedback that we get on that service is the overall compliance level is increased because we're guaranteeing you're never going to file late. You're going to file correctly, meaning you're going to use the correct forms as they change. We provide those updates, as well as the method of filing, whether that's electronic or hard copy, as well as the remittance to that jurisdiction, whether they want electronic payment, cutting a check. We do all that legwork for you so your folks don't have to track, how not only are we filing in this new jurisdiction, but have they recently changed their rules, because we want to be doing that correctly. We take all that guesswork off your plate and handle that in-house. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And one of the common questions that Jeffrey and I get on these demonstrations is this going to slow down my typical order process? And the typical answer that we give is, when we're looking at where's this transaction taking place, what are the correct rates, how's my product being viewed, so on and so forth, we're doing all that heavy lifting on average in about 0.4 of a second. It's what we refer to as a sub-second challenge here. So we're validating the address, meaning we're dropping a pin on the map like you do on Google Maps, and actually assigning, underneath the standard postal service address validation, we're assigning a latitude and longitude to that address, which automatically flows through, the sourcing rules, the jurisdiction assignment, applying those rules. Then we're getting into the customer piece of looking at, is this someone or a business that we should be charging sales tax to, or are they exempt? We're looking at the product taxability in this location here. We're even checking tax holiday status if that applies, and automatically returning that to your invoicing system, in this case, Business Central, and check out, and then we store the info for future remittance if you want us to do that as well. So a lot going on behind the scenes, but we're not going to slow down your typical business process. So that's who we are at a very high level. And I know Jeffrey has some things that he wants to speak to this on the sub-second challenge, as well as when I turn it over to him here.
Yeah, Larry, excellent point. And I just want to clarify, when we talk about performing all of these actions, understanding the address, understanding all of the rules that apply, where you're warehousing, where it's coming from, where it's going to, what are the rules around this customer, specifically what you are selling to them, how is this document applied on this date of invoicing, all these different rules about how to tax a product. So everything we do on this slide, we currently perform about 60 milliseconds. So extremely fast. And so kind of the number that Larry was referencing there is a normal call and response. And so from your system reaching out to us making the determination and responding back is on average about 200 or 400 milliseconds. So extremely fast to see all of this. And basically the idea is when you're in BC or really in any platform, again, whether you're leveraging a retail functionality, whether you're leveraging sales or have websites, or certainly within the BC environment, tax is just showing up. So as your customers are in shopping carts or while you're creating quotes and orders within BC, tax is just showing up as you're progressing. So a lot happening behind the scenes, and I love this slide because it kind of unpacks what we do. So otherwise, you're going to have to build out all of this logic in BC and understanding how are these rules applied, what are the rates that apply, what is the document application for them. And there's just a lot you'd have to build out in BC that when you're tying AvaTax in, we fully automate this behind the scenes and make it very easy for you. So excellent call out, Larry.
Well, great. So at this point, if there aren't any questions, I'll go ahead and move forward with the demonstration piece. And Jeffrey, I'll stop sharing my screen here so you can take.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask the folks at TM Group. I'm currently listed still as a panelist. If you could just promote me to presenter. Oh, there you go, right on it. Thank you. So are you seeing AvaTax on your screen right now, Larry?
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk a little about this. So we're going to walk through what's happening behind the scenes of BC. And essentially, there's a few touch points that we're going to want to make sure that we're focusing on it. And I think you called it out earlier, Larry, when you were talking about that who, what, and where. So there's things that are unique around a customer we need to account for. There's things that are unique about the item that is being sold to, and then also unique things around an address. So let's kind of unpack those three different categories. And really, when we get those things understood, tax, again, is going to just present itself throughout these different actions that we can take within BC. So first and foremost, within AvaTax, understand that you can configure it that if you have multiple companies, if you have different DBAs, that if you are acquiring companies, if you are spinning off companies, the fact is, in today's environment, things are always changing. It becomes very easy to create different companies within AvaTax, and you can segment that information appropriately through them. And then BC is smart enough to tell me that when you're creating these orders and quotes, which company to look at and how should you record that information. Now, underneath these different companies that we're establishing within BC, or within AvaTax to be applied within BC, you're also walking through and telling me where you need to collect tax. And this is part of what Larry was talking about in the beginning. This is kind of the pressing issue, where we have companies that maybe historically were in 5 states, 10 states, and now they're grappling with 20 states, 25 states. So as they're dealing with more states, it's as simple as coming in and checking the box to activate the rates, rules, and functionality within those states. So very easy for me to start scaling again from 5 states to 10 states to 15 states. And then as you check that box again, it's going to spin up all those rates, rules, everything else. And one of the things that's important to call out here is, Larry, you mentioned earlier about all these different things that are happening behind the scenes to figure out the rules. You also mentioned, SaaS versus on-prem. Realize that there's a lot of changes that happen throughout a year, especially on the first of a month. On July 1st, so about a month ago, we had to roll out 64,000 different changes behind the scenes to accommodate all the different rules. Some of the boundaries were changing. And when you're using a cloud solution, you don't have to run any updates. You don't have to maintain or really worry about those pieces because it's just happening in real time behind the scenes in AvaTax. Now, Larry, you also mentioned a little bit about global functionality, and you mentioned certainly the EU where we have a few offices, but please understand that when we talk about the Business Central integration, it is truly a global integration. So we currently support 240 global jurisdictions, so the 193 nations acknowledged by the UN and a lot of other territories like Canary Islands and Palestine and what have you. Similar idea. So as you start selling in and crossing thresholds or establishing within countries, you're simply checking boxes to spin up that VAT, GST, or whatever that local tax content is, and very easy to deploy, again, all part of the same connector that you have live within BC. So before I hop back into BC, let me talk a little bit also about some of these things that are happening out there on Economic Nexus. So Larry had that wonderful slide earlier about like beginning of the year and end of the year, where a few of the states were highlighted, end of the year, all of the states were highlighted. But the challenge being is each of these states are looking at how they interpret this economic nexus. And let me just make sure that we're on the same page. The idea historically is you as a seller, if you had to have people, place, or things within a state to have to collect tax, and with this new shift to economic nexus, now it depends where your customers are, is where you would need to collect tax. So now as you start looking at these states, they're looking at different pieces of information, things like how many times have you sold into our state, or what's the volume of sales into our state. And that may be just the taxable number, or that may be the gross number. So if you're selling to other businesses and you have an exempt certificate on file, those numbers could absolutely count in some of these states. And our customers came to us and said, hey, if you're plugged in behind BC and you know all these rules out there and you're watching my transactions as I'm creating these invoices for my customers, can you help me know when I need to register for states? And that's exactly what we see here. This map is a direct reflection about your sales across the US and how these economic nexus rules apply to you. So states in gray are states that you've either already registered or already established in, or you're not close to a threshold. States in yellow mean that you've now crossed 80% of the threshold and it'd be worthwhile kind of putting it on your radar. And the states in orange mean that you've now crossed the threshold and it would be smart to start taking actions and registering in those states. And in fact, directly within the AvaTax tool, you can go ahead and register in that new state as you cross the threshold, and then come back in here, check the box to turn that new state on, and now you're fully up and running and compliant in those states. And so very easy to start scaling as you go forward, but just know that we have some really nice business intelligence around your sales and helping you know when it would make sense to register in states that you are not yet registered in. So we're sitting behind BC. I kind of know what your company structure is. I know what states you're collecting in. And the idea is we're going to look at a few of those things. So that who, what, and where. So understand first off, when we talk about what, you're going to be storing this thing called a tax code within your items in BC. And when I'm talking about a tax code, essentially that is a unique definition of a thing that you are selling. So I'm going to show you in a moment where this is stored within your record under the item. But when I talk about a tax code, essentially the idea is this thing that you are selling is going to be taxed differently in some state or some country than in other states or in other countries. And I'm going to pause there for a moment, Larry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you
Okay.
perfectly.
GoToMeeting is letting me know that there's some audio issues, and so I just want to make sure that you are hearing me okay. All right, so within the tax codes, you're going through and you're picking things that line up to some of the things that you sell. So if you sell software, if you sell SaaS, if you are certainly in food or clothing has so many unique rules out there. But certainly almost every company that's shipping physical products to customers is dealing with freight. And so when you start talking about even what you charge a customer for delivering items, you'll see here that I have like 30 different definitions about what the thing is. So do you call it freight? Are you delivering in company vehicles? Do you call it shipping? Do you call it shipping and handling? And the fact is, the reason we have to delineate those things is because states are going to tax them differently. So the nice thing there is, let's just say you call it freight. And so this is our generic freight code. Well, within BC, what you're going to do is, and again, these are different items that I have in BC, you're going to store that tax code underneath the item. So as we look at this tax group here, I have them just default. So if I don't choose a tax code, I'm just going to default to the taxable. But in this scenario, maybe I am using software, or I have some other, I have dogs because I'm a veterinary office. Whatever it is that you're using, you're going to link that tax code directly to the item. And then BC is going to tell me that as you're quoting and creating orders, you know what the item is. And it's also telling me these tax codes, and that I'm going to know how the states are going to tax that type of item. Now, secondarily, we're also going to think about the who. So when we're talking about the customers that are established within BC, here, let's open up the first one here. There's two things that we want to think through here. So first off, one of the things that Larry mentioned is that we get very specific when we look at an address to apply tax. In fact, we're actually looking at a latitude, longitude. So when an address is created within BC, you can actually validate that address as part of the AvaTax integration. But you know what? If you're doing a unique kind of work and you're delivering the job sites and other things, and you don't even have physical addresses, and this actually comes up a lot, where maybe they're delivering to a corner or to a site, and it doesn't have a USPS deliverable address, know that we can absolutely take the latitude, longitude that you store within BC and determine tax off of that. But also know that if you have an address in here, when you're coming through here, you can also validate that address, and that's going to call out to us. But behind the scenes for us, when we're figuring out tax, I'm getting to a latitude, longitude, but you can actually cleanse that address information. So that's one of the nice perks about having AvaTax tied in, is you can also cleanse addresses wherever you are inputting them. So whether that's under the customer card, or while you're actually creating quotes or orders, if you're kind of keying in a different delivery address, know that you absolutely have that ability to validate the address directly within that quote or order as well. So as we have this information, we're also telling the system that I want to go ahead and have AvaTax figure out, the tax when I'm creating quotes and orders for this customer. So you'll see here that I have a tax area code, and this is where you would natively build out kind of all of those rates and rules and all that functionality within BC. And essentially you're saying, just let AvaTax figure it out. So as part of the configuration, you're going to make the default for your customers this call out to AvaTax, and that will allow us to figure out that tax. So let's just take a quick look quickly at a order here. And I'm not going to make you watch me while I create a quote or an order here. So let's just grab one that's already in here. All right, so as we look at this item, you'll see that we have some items that were being sold to a customer. And again, I can still take those same actions and validate the address while I'm going through here. In this example here, I just have freight on this one line. And if I add these different items in here, again, you're going to see tax just showing itself. So the idea is for everyday users, they don't know that it's AvaTax behind the scenes figuring out the tax on this item. Of course, they can see in real time the fact that we are looking at AvaTax, and you can even see kind of how things are being called out. But you're just going to have that real-time calculation of tax that's coming in here. And you can choose by the configuration that as you add different lines, you want the tax to keep being a running tally, or you want to add all your lines, and then as you advance the quote or item, then have the tax show up. So easy to choose kind of how you want tax to show up. But when we have this $7 that's going to show in the system, let's kind of unpack what's really happening in that to get that number. So let's grab a few transactions here. So first off, let's take a look at a sales item that is coming into, let's do a North Carolina one here. So in this example, know that BC has told me that, hey, this is the company we want to record this information in. This is a US transaction, so we're going to record this one in US dollars. We also have a customer number that came across from BC that we then in turn check that cert capture platform saying, hey, do I have a certificate on file for that customer? Note too that if you don't use our solution called cert capture to manage the certificates, you can actually store that same document information within BC, and then BC will actually tell me what's called end of use code. And essentially, it's a categorization about why this customer is exempt. Are they a resale? Are they a government agency? Are they a nonprofit? And the reason is because these states have different rules for the type of customer that is exempt within them. And note too, there's, again, as I mentioned earlier, there's two different ways that you're calling into our system. So it's when we talk about a quote versus an order and invoice, when we talk about the quote up front, we're estimating tax. And this is also very common if you have us plugged into websites or other locations where maybe you're showing tax to a customer as they're going through the checkout process. Maybe they're buying a few items in your website, so you're showing them tax and you do that authorization on the card. But then on the back end, you're actually going to commit that order within BC. And so at that point in time, that's when the commit call would happen. And essentially it's saying, you know, this sale has occurred, so we're now responsible for the tax on this order. In this example here, it looks like we are selling within North Carolina. We have an item, we actually have a few items here, so 31 different items totaling $66. And you'll see kind of the logic that we're going through here is, yes, you are collecting tax in North Carolina. Yes, this customer was taxable. I didn't have a certificate on file. And then also this product was deemed taxable. So at this location, there is both a state and a county rate of 4.7 and 2.2, equaling a total of 7.0. And then you can also see the amount of tax that's being broken out across those different jurisdictions, which of course makes it very easy later to pull reports that if I have this level of granularity on every item that's being passed across from BC, it means there's a lot of information that I can pull from this and see that reporting. Let's take a look at a different transaction here. This is one I posted a little while ago. And so in this example here, this was a customer shipping from PA to Texas. Again, kind of the similar idea of what we're walking through here, but you'll see that we're actually selling SaaS now. And so software as a service actually has a unique taxability rule within Texas. And they're not going to say, yes, it's taxable or no, it's not taxable. They're going to say it's partially taxable. So they actually say within Texas, the customer, the item is 80% taxable to the customer. So beyond having to figure out the state, the city, and the local taxes of 6.2, 1.5, and 0.5, you also know what the base is. And so what portion of the item I'm selling is taxable. So we automatically will see that it's SaaS, break out the 1,000 as being non-taxable, the 4,000 as being taxable, and then apply the tax only on the portion that is taxable. And that's why it's really inherently hard to try and build out this functionality within BC without using a tax automation provider. Is not only do you have to try and build out rates, which again, maybe you're doing that off of zip codes, which is not going to get you granular enough to make sure. You really have to look at the building level. Because if we're looking at just zip codes, over 40% of zip codes have multiple tax rates within them. So it becomes harder for me to try and figure out within a zip code, what rate do I apply? And then also trying to build out all these different taxability rules. Whereas once AvaTax is plugged in, again, we're going to choose that tax code within BC to just point to AvaTax, and we're going to figure out all of this logic behind the scenes, and tax is just going to show up while you're operating in BC. So final two pieces of the puzzle here for us, reporting. So as we have this information coming across from BC, it becomes very easy for me, again, to kind of look at that detail, lots of different reports here, but you'll see all the reports are pretty easy to pull. Give me a date range, tell me which company you want to pull that transaction for. Are we looking countrywide or just very specific, only certain states? I can pull in Excel if I want to. I'm going to leave this one in HTML. And in fact, as I choose my reports, I can also flag them as favorites, so it becomes easy when I log in. They're sitting right there on my home page. But when I'm looking at these transactions, now I can start looking at, so for the state of California, I had about 450,000 worth of sales that was standard rated. I actually had a little bit of sales that went into an industrial customer that had a different rate that applied on the state level. None of that went to exempt organizations. About 60,000 of that was non-taxable because the state of California said the nature of the item that you are selling is non-taxable. And you know what? The rest of it was deemed taxable. Effective rate, tax collected, and then you see that breakout across the different counties and locals. If you're trying to explore a little more about where these numbers are coming from, anything in blue are all live links. So I can just click on Placer County, and now I can see my different BC order numbers that came across, different types of things that I sold. And in fact, I could even click on this original transaction, and it goes back to that initial detail that I was showing you a moment ago. Final piece of the puzzle is we can also track your returns. So as you have this information coming into us, obviously you still have to do the return and hand the money back over to that state. So you can tell us what locations, what different states you are currently registered in, tell us the frequency with which those returns are due. And then each month you're simply coming in here, reviewing these things and saying, so for this month, what's due? And so I'm a demo environment, so let me go back in time a little bit here. But for this month, I have about 3 million worth of sales, 3.1, of which 2.9 of that was taxable. I collected about 243,000 worth from my customers. Know that you can also tie us in and look at your purchase side. So if you want us to do review of the items that you're purchasing and see if the vendor billed you the correct tax, we can help with that as well. In this example here, I determined there was some additional use tax that I needed to accrue as well. And we'll see that the amount calculated is higher than the amount due, which of course means because some of these states have a vendor discount. So if you file when you're supposed to with that state, you can actually save some of that money. So in this example here, we're saving the customer about $4,000, almost $5,000 by using a service like us to make sure that it is filed on time when it needs to be. And then as we look at these different returns, you are simply coming down to approve your different returns. And again, I'm a demo environment. I'm sorry, I got a lot of returns in here. But it's as simple as, so for the state of Georgia, last month I had 97,000 worth of sales, 32 was deemed taxable. We collected 2,400 from customers. After that discount I mentioned, 2,300 is due. And if we're going through and we're making sure these numbers line up to what we're expecting to file with the different jurisdictions, you're simply coming through here and you're just checking approve to drive that return activity. We will then receive one ACH from you for your total liability that we turn around and we start paying them. So if Connecticut's due on the 15th and Georgia the 20th and Louisiana is the 25th and Massachusetts is the last day of the month, we're going to make sure they're filed when they need to be. You no longer have to worry about tracking all these different returns throughout the month. Approve at the beginning of the month, by the end of the day on the 10th of the month, and then we will then drive that activity from there and file all those returns. As we perform those returns, know that we will also keep a full archive here for all the returns that we have filed for you. And as part of this service, we're also going to notice handling. So as you may receive notices from these states, we can take the initial response all the way through resolution for you as part of our return service. So Larry, I kind of wanted to cover this in a nice, like a half hour, easy to digest for everybody on the phone here. And I think we can explore more on a specific case-by-case scenario about, what they're selling, who they're selling to, and then certainly walk through some of those pieces. But just know that high level, with us tied into BC, it's a very easy to deploy bundle that in real time we can figure out those items, figure out all of those rules, and have tax just show up within BC itself. So with that, I'll pause, Larry. Did we have questions or things we wanted to talk about more specifically, or did that kind of cover the main topic for us?
No, that was fantastic, covering, at a high level, the full functionality, not only of the system, but also the integration with BC. So I think at this point, we can open it up for any questions that have come through in the chat. Do we have any questions so far?
Or can we just talk questions?
Sure.
So thank you all for taking the time and kind of listening. When we talk about tax automation within BC, and the fact is that companies are dealing with more states, and there's a lot of complexity as you register in those states, trying to figure out who you're selling to, what documents do I need, what am I selling, where is it going to, and doing all this time and all this in real time within BC. So ideally, here with AvaTax, we can plug in, figure out all the information, and then just present that within BC. So thank you all for the time for listening as we walk through this, and we're excited to have a continued conversation. And TM Group, thank you very much for having us to talk about this today.